Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. I am Joseph Attic, the Executive Chairman of ID for Africa, and I would like to welcome you to this restart, this new season of our LiveCasts, which is starting with a very, very exciting session on face recognition. But before we speak about this session, I've got a few announcements to share with you quickly. I am sure some of you have seen the announcement we made earlier in the month regarding the fact that we've moved our general annual meeting from October 2020 to 27th to 29th October 2021. This decision was made in consultation with the host government because of the continued restrictions on large-scale gatherings such as ours and the lack of transportation, airlines that would be servicing the country. So while we are disappointed that we will not be seeing each other face to face in this year, rest assured we are not sitting idle. We are leveraging this medium to advance our collective agenda. We will, in fact, see each other 30 to 40 times before we meet again in Marrakesh in 2021. We have a whole series of LiveCasts that are being organized with fresh content, with a pertinent material, with experts that are going to be sharing with us and joining us. In fact, ID for Africa has become the voice of Africa on identity matters. And this voice is being heard, in fact, all over the world. With us, through the LiveCasts, through this medium, we welcome more than 90 countries, representatives and delegates and attendees from more than 90 countries. So we're excited to see the breadth that we're going into. So in addition to our LiveCasts, which are being organized 30 to 40 in this coming year, we will also be bringing to you in November an exposition, a virtual exposition, a completely new concept in how technology will be brought to you. But anyway, we will give you more information about that when in due time. Back to this month, I want to attract your attention to a few important announcements regarding the two sessions that are coming up after the face recognition session. We have a big event coming up September 16, which is on inclusion, happens to coincide with the ID Day. So this is the September 16 celebration. We believe inclusion is the largest, most important challenge that is faced in Africa. It's not interoperability, it's not trust, it's really achieving inclusion so that everybody can be counted, can be brought in. So we're going to talk about the root causes of exclusion, the barriers to inclusion, and share experiences from countries that have actually made significant progress in the inclusion agenda. So stay tuned for that. Please join us. And then on September 23rd, we are launching a new series, which we are excited about. And this new series is, in fact, we call the Country Progress Report. And we start with a spotlight on Nigeria. As you can see, we will be bringing in the identity stakeholders from Nigeria on a roundtable, where we will have an open and frank discussion among all of them to understand the demand and supply side of the identity ecosystem in the country and extract lessons that could be really useful for other countries. So we'll be doing, of course, many countries in Africa in due time. This takes a lot of effort to organize, bringing in all of the political as well as the operational people that are in charge of the strategy and vision of their country regarding identity. But it's a very important activity, and it's the only one that you can find in any forum. It's only here at ID for Africa. There's a lot more. We don't have time to go over them in October, for example, but the best way to stay informed in our LiveCast is our LiveCast page. So please bookmark that, keep visiting it and see the new announcements that we are making. regarding what's coming on the program. I also ask you to please do me a favor and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Go to the YouTube channel of ID for Africa, the media channel, and subscribe. Why? Because we will be putting up a lot of valuable content that we really want you to have access to as members and part of this identity community. So anyway, now we're going to go back to our session today. We're very, very excited to have assembled an illustrious panel focused on face recognition. We are going to start with a major keynote by Patrick Grother. Patrick does not need introduction. Patrick is somebody that I've known over 15 years, but he's well renowned for being the person who knows most about face recognition and evaluation in the world. So we're really pleased to have Patrick with us. Patrick will deliver a keynote. You will get an opportunity to ask Patrick questions directly. We've also received questions from you, which we will be sharing. We've shared with Patrick, and maybe he will have time to answer those. Afterwards, we are going to have basically rapid fire case studies. We'll have 4 different case studies where face recognition has been used with success for development, so positive applications. And then we are going to bring an in-conversation session with Pam Dixon and Teki Falconer, who are going to be engaged with me in what I hope would be a fireworks type of debate and discussion on the responsible use of face recognition and the need for regulation or not. At that time, you as members of the panel, you can raise your hand and you can attract the attention of an operator from ID for Africa, and we'll prepare you to get on the panel to share your views. We'll have the community voices segment. All in all, we'll have an exciting 2 hours filled with important, fresh content from experts that are worldwide in their reputation. So without any further delay, I would first thank the entire panel for being with us, for their contribution, and then we'll come back to you one by one. And then I would like now to ask Patrick to step to the stage and take control and share his screen.
Thank you, Joseph. Thank you very much for the invitation to talk today. It's a privilege to be here. So I work for an organization called NIST, part of the US government under the US Department of Commerce. We have been involved in face recognition for maybe 20 plus years now. Our most famous activity is the face recognition vendor test. Here you see an overview of the various activities within that. What I'm going to talk about today are various products that come from our benchmarking activities. We track the technology and report it openly on our website. You can Google NIST and FRT to give you pretty much all the information that you will see today. And I'm happy to share these slides afterwards. So what is face recognition actually doing? It's doing what other biometrics do. It compares essentially 2 samples at its core. This kind of activity is used in border crossing gates of the kind shown on the left there. But the goal is to deduce whether the 2 images you can see here are the same person or a different person. And that is a non-trivial task. You can perhaps look at these 2 faces and have difficulty determining this. I will tell you the true answer in just a moment, but how would face recognition proceed with that? Both images would get sent to a black box, a identity extractor that produces what's called a feature vector, or maybe a template, which is a representation of identity information in the face. We do that to 2 images and then we compare them. That's the center black box. That produces a score, and In this case, these are different people. They're my colleagues, and one is a sister of my colleague. And so the correct response would be to produce a low score and to say it's a different person. Now, that technology, those black boxes nowadays are built with convolutional neural networks, AI, from machine learning. They are not commoditized. This is not something that is open source. There's a lot of trade secrets, a lot of intellectual property in there. The feature vectors, the encoding of the face is maybe 2 kilobytes, sometimes as small as 0.2 kilobytes. And they can be produced on a typical CPU in less than 1 second. That's how face recognition proceeds at its core. And I said that face recognition is not easy. There are errors. There are particularly false rejection errors where I don't match a photo of me. And in that case, I wouldn't get through an e-passport gate. And there's been a revolution in the accuracy of face recognition now over at least a decade. This graph shows the reduction in false negatives over a 3-year period from one typical algorithm, which happens to be IDEMIA in Paris. And though they've evolved their algorithms along with all the other developers, and the error rates have come down from 13%, which is 1 in 6 or 1 in 7 transactions failing, down to 0.6%. And that is because the technology is much more capable of handling poor images. And this is not an easy data set that we've used here. This is an operational data set. So this result is quite impressive. We track the technology. We publish open benchmarks. This is essentially a screenshot of our website. You can see algorithms listed on the left side from different suppliers. And on the columns of this table are different data sets of different kinds of images. And the error rates there, the lower is better. That table extends now to 400 rows. And it's interesting to monitor the technology that way. Recently, of course, we've started wearing protective face masks, and it was interesting to know what would happen if you were to hide some percentage of the face. So we covered faces digitally with either solid masks or textured masks, and then we ran the algorithms on those. Now, that was never going to be a very good thing for face recognition, but in the best case at the top there, the failure rates have increased, say from 0.4% to 2.4%. So that's taking the technology back maybe 2 or 3 years. It's a setback compared to what it was. Some algorithms, however, at the bottom of this screen are entirely intolerant of face masks, and the failure rate can be very, very high. So some algorithms are probably usable and some algorithms are probably not. And we are evolving this kind of data as we go continuously. So the larger market segment for face recognition is one-to-many identification. There are a number of applications, typically document fraud, visa fraud, national ID, duplicate detection, but also in casinos, in aircraft boarding, in video surveillance. And humans are not normally used much in those applications. They would adjudicate some errors. Of course, there's another class of application, this criminal investigation, where face recognition is being used with a human in conjunction. How does this proceed? Essentially, we do a one-to-many search by doing many one-to-one comparisons. 2 kinds of errors can occur: a false negative, where the person is not found in the database, and also a false positive, where a person is erroneously returned by a search. And there are cases reported where false positives and true positives occur, and they've been reported in the press. So as a demonstration of how well one-to-many can work, what we did is we enrolled images of the kind on the left. And we enrolled 104 million of those from about 32 million people. So that's the population of Mozambique and I think Angola approximately. And the idea is to search an image of the kind on the left and look at the accuracy. So we did this with a demonstration using an algorithm from NEC in Japan. And those algorithms that algorithm is successful at returning the correct image from a search with a 99.6% success rate, a 0.4% miss rate. So that would be a result appropriate to an investigative search. But if you are going to do high volume searches and you have a low false positive rate, then that error rate will drop. You have to increase the threshold. And in this case, with a 1% false positive rate, you can still identify 99.4% of the people in that database. So that is a remarkable result, given that the images are far from passport compliance, ICAO compliance. We maintain, again, a leaderboard, different algorithms on different data sets, and we track the technology continuously and publish the results. So what is the state of the industry? There's been an expansion of the industry enabled by better algorithms that are very accurate on high quality images, that are tolerant of poor quality increasingly, that are tolerant of aging also increasingly, and can operate in very large databases. China, the Europeans, Japan and Russia are very active in development. The technology is not commoditized. Some algorithms are much better than others, so buyer beware. We can still do better with the cameras to improve quality, so there are standardization activities going on. On the right side of this slide, the issue of demographics, which I'll get to on the next few slides, and twins also are not separable. I'll get to that in just a second. And also there are opportunities to attack face recognition, as with other biometrics. Face is perhaps problematic because it's easy to steal another person's face if you're going to launch an impersonation attack of them. Many systems are not defending against that currently, some are, and there are some other attacks. Also, human capability, when a human is employed to look at face results, human capability is poor and also potentially biased. So what do I mean by performance bias? We can look to Apple, no less, for some data on this. After they released their iPhone X, they quickly added a web page indicating that the false positive rate on twins and siblings and children was a lot higher than the 1 in a million false positive rate than they had marketed the phone as. And that effect is shared with traditional face recognition hosted on other platforms. And so we produced a report looking at these various issues on demographics in December last year. And we noted that false positive rates vary with age, that's the cells in each of these blocks, and also geographically with where people were born. And of course it varies with the algorithm. What you see here is a measure of false positives for an algorithm out of the UK. And you can see much higher false positive rates in elderly Chinese women than you do in white males from Eastern Europe. And that has security implications for something like border crossing and other applications. And what you would like is for those false positive rates to be much more uniform, not varying with age or with sex or with geography, with race. We produced a lot of data on that. There is some developer activity to mitigate these differentials. In all cases, these differentials are not necessarily material. It depends on the application. So it's very important to walk through the consequences of errors in face recognition systems, false negatives and false positives. And I've given 3 different applications here. I won't go through them in detail, but you have to think through your volumes, your probability of fraudulent behavior, and the kind of algorithm that you're using, different implications for different applications, and they need to be thought through. Quality, of course, matters. There are many, many ways to take very bad photographs, and eventually you will undermine performance. There are standardization efforts, long-standing efforts going on within ISO SC37 on image quality, on passport image interchange, and on face-aware capture recently. Those bottom two standards there are now under development and are worthy of considerable attention in the future. I shall mention twins. Twins are quite common, 1 in 30 births in the United States. And twins vary considerably with geography across the world. So they're not uncommon. They're more common, I think, in West Africa than they are in East Asia. And face recognition algorithms will routinely confuse identical twins. So here we have 3 algorithms being used in a one-to-many search, and they are all returning the twin as the person in the database. So that is something that needs to be considered and planned for when operating. It also happens with fraternal twins, but they do not score as highly. Some fraternal twins are a different sex, and they are not falsely matched typically. Twins are a problem for face recognition, replacing, say, 10 fingerprints, because with fingerprints, we don't see false positives in related individuals. And in face, it implies a limit on how low we can go with false positive rates. But because twins exist in society, in national scale databases or local databases, and other family relationships, we can't get to very low false positives. And that is not something you expect to happen with fingerprints or with iris recognition. And that brings me to one slide on modality comparison. So why face over, for example, fingerprints versus iris? And I reference this table to the sort of definitional properties written down 20 years ago for biometrics, that they must be unique, they must be available, they must be socially acceptable, they must be permanent. And more or less, different modalities have different compliance to those ideal traits. So if we look at uniqueness, a single finger will not be as unique as a face nowadays. 10 fingers will be highly unique, not always available. So that's the third column there. Some fingerprints, the demographics column off to the right there, that in elderly people using certain kinds of sensors, you don't necessarily see good fingerprint images. So there are demographic issues, false negatives, particularly in the elderly, false positives in face recognition, and different social acceptance on the right side there. ICAO wrote a very nice study of that when they were formulating the 9303 passport regulation document. Different sensors, different capabilities, different speed. All of the cells in this matrix have a nuanced discussion. And particularly, there are applications where any particular property is not really relevant. So for example, some same-day airport applications wouldn't need to worry about aging of a biometric. Yeah, I'm happy to sort of entertain any questions either today or offline about that kind of matrix. And you could reach me, my email at work is that, and our face recognition vendor test also has an email. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Patrick. We have time for taking questions. There have been several questions from the audience that have come up. they can be lumped together. In fact, one area that people are wondering about, Patrick, in your opinion, do you think face alone, maybe plus some certain exception handling, is sufficient to deal with one-to-many deduplication at a national scale without invoking any other biometric?
I don't think so. India made its choice a decade ago now to use iris and fingerprints. Obviously, face recognition is much better today, but contemporary algorithms are not capable of disambiguating twins. There are approaches that can solve that using high-resolution imagery and skin texture, but a national ID program would need to address the possibility of twins today.
And do you think the issue of fraternal relations, not twins, is that something the algorithms will come to the accuracy levels that we could tell that they are related but not the same person?
I think so. Blood relatives give higher similarity scores. They may well be below threshold and face recognition would work anyway. But in something like a surveillance system, it would be possibly problematic.
Now, I mean, this is on the side. Should there be any privacy implications in that, like knowing that I am the brother of somebody? Is that something that we should worry about in society, that there is a technology that can tell who is related to me? Is that a dimension? Perhaps it's something that I'll leave for the other panelists, but have you explored that as a potential issue?
We haven't done privacy analysis or even work on privacy enhancing technologies. That's something we want to do in the future. But you know, there are ethical problems. The DNA community have looked at, you know, the ethics of being able to associate individuals that you didn't know were related. Face would be less powerful than DNA in doing that, of course. But yeah.
And but from a technology point of view, you cannot really tell that these are related, or it just happens to be somebody with a similar score. I mean, there isn't a special signal that we can extract, right?
Yeah, that's right. Unless identical twins, and particularly young identical twins, you wouldn't be able to conclude a familial relationship. Yeah.
Familial relationship. Okay. There's a lot of questions now on the chat about 3D face. Has NIST been interested exploring, or will NIST be exploring 3D face?
Yeah, we want to. We haven't. All of our benchmarks are run with traditional 2D photographs. 3D obviously has advantages for accuracy, for spoof detection. We want to work in that domain. We are limited by the amount of data that we have.
Okay. Now, if I may ask you, Patrick, on page 34 of your slide deck, you have answered very quickly, rapid answers to many questions that came in prior. Could you please share your screen again and just run through these answers so that people will be satisfied that their questions were answered?
I'll try, yes.
It's page 34.
Yeah.
Yes. So please, if you may run through some of these answers.
So the question is, can we look at score calibration procedures to remove demographic bias? There are some studies going on in that area. It is a research issue. This is properly the responsibility of the vendor community, I believe. And the idea would be to suppress false positives. I think that's got potential. Retraining algorithms has also got potential. A company in Europe has published on that aspect. Second question, how age-related face changes affect the accuracy rates? Yes, unfortunately, we change appearance over time at some graceful rate. That change in appearance will depress the similarity scores. Eventually, it will undermine recognition. The algorithms are more tolerant of that than they used to be. I don't think it would affect matching speed. The third question, live capture against photo captured from laminated or protected paper document. NIST doesn't have a study on that. An organization associated with Homeland Security in the United States has recent data on that. Publication is pending, and that was for using a US driving license to go through an airport identity check. And I think the results there are quite encouraging. Again, it depends on using a modern, good algorithm. Can face recognition work on the newly born? Yes, the best data on that has come from an Australian government study using passport photos. There are some human factors, issues with getting a baby to look at the camera and to stay still. And the Aussie study does show that you can't do 10-year recognition. Aging is too rapid and error rates do creep up. But over the short run, 1 year, 2 years, face recognition has shown quite remarkable accuracy even in the very young. There are some more false positives in the very young. How can face avoid bias? The next question. How can it be audited to certify it is free of race and gender bias? Free is quite a strong word. I'm not sure we'll ever get to a point where it is free of all age, race, gender bias. Control testing is needed. You need to be able to show that these underlying factors have been mitigated. And potentially, I think the vendor community believes that retraining is necessary on more diverse data, image data. Relative accuracy of face compared with iris and fingerprint is again quite a complicated discussion. As I mentioned, face doesn't get to low false positive rates, but things like iris and fingerprints have problems getting to very low false negative rates. Fingerprints can be damaged. In elderly people with an optical sensor, they may be difficult to take photos of. Iris recognition, sometimes the capture devices are somewhat difficult to use and enrollment doesn't always succeed with both eyes. There are advanced optical designs, obviously, for both iris and fingerprint that address those issues. But face recognition algorithms will enroll most faces that aren't included by face masks or other attire. When would you ever use face? When you already have finger. Capture speed is possible if you've got some high volume access control application maybe, or you're concerned about social acceptance, or you've got different concerns about spoofing. I'm not sure what my last comment means there, but there are reasons to use face when you have finger, to do with lower false negatives and concerning with the threat environment or the concerns that you have with security. Yeah.
Excellent. Patrick, let's go back to the question of bias, gender, racial bias of the technology. From your expert opinion, do you think this is fundamental to the dimensionality of the space, representation of face? For example, if we overtrain in one racial group, then the other group would be insensitive or would be making higher mistakes. But when we shift and train to the other racial group, aren't we going to have potentially certain algorithms which will begin to show the inverse bias? It's not something that's related to the size of the space. So even when we went in a diverse data set, maybe there is a fundamental limitation. Are we hitting a fundamental limitation or not? That's my question.
I don't think there's fundamental limitations here. The face recognition would be better if it could see different features in a face image. Skin texture is one of them, features in the periocular region around the eyes. There's information that is not being captured in contemporary photos. like passport photos. But I think if more diverse training data was available to the developer community, they could address existing biases today, the false positive biases. The false negative differentials in face recognition we found were quite small. Photos, face recognition algorithms are capable of dealing quite well with overexposed and underexposed photos with poor photography, essentially.
Right, but Patrick, how difficult is it for a player like Facebook, for example, to assemble a really diverse database and show that there is no fundamental bias in the technology once and for all? This is what I'm not yet arriving at the conclusion or being convinced of, basically, because the data does exist with the big players. And unfortunately, none of them were tested in your tests.
Yeah, we did evaluate Microsoft. I don't think Microsoft would have the number of images that Facebook has, obviously. So Facebook is in a unique position to be able to answer some fundamental questions here. Most of the time, we don't know how much data that the leading biometrics providers actually have. You know, IDEMIA, NEC, Thales, Cogent. We don't know how much data they have or what access to data they have. It's probably not enough. You talk to a machine learning person and they always want more and better data.
Well, I think we need to call upon those that have the data. We make a call for action to Facebook. If any of them are listening to this, we need to establish once and for all whether face recognition has fundamental bias because of the limitation in the dimensionality of the informational space of the face, or whether it's just simply we do not have enough data to do the training and therefore establish a racially diverse algorithm. So I call upon Facebook because they seem to be the ones that have that data. If they don't want to participate in your testing, maybe they can come up and show us independent data that there is no bias in there. Because this is a political issue right now around the world. We're wondering about gender, we're wondering about face, racial compositions, age. So if this can be resolved scientifically, we shouldn't be turning around and avoiding head-on answering this question. So would you be interested in testing Facebook's algorithm?
Of course, yeah, our doors are open to anybody worldwide with an algorithm. We have no mechanism to compel them to participate. Okay,
so hopefully they're listening and hopefully they will join this call, which is very, very important to the future of this technology. Absolutely. Okay, actually, we've taken a lot of time. There are a lot of questions that are coming in as well. Unfortunately, we don't have time to answer them live, but as you have given your contact information, hopefully those people will contact you and can get some answers. For those who are interested in Patrick's presentation, please email us and we'll arrange for you to have access to it. Patrick, thank you so much for your contribution. We can go on for several hours on this topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, next, I think we are going to start the case studies. And we will ask SITA to come to the stage and talk to us about how face recognition is being used today in a positive manner for travel. Jihad, Boueri.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much for this opportunity given to me today. And thank you, Patrick, for all this very useful and fruitful information. What I will be showing here is how we use this technology for the airport business. So my name is Jihad Boueri. I work for SITA. And SITA is not a manufacturer for any kind of face recognition. SITA is an IT company specialized for the air transport industry. So what I will be showing in this presentation is a case study on how we are using the face recognition at the airport for the passenger processing. Next slide, please. That was the introduction of myself. So I'm responsible of the Middle East and Africa region. So we take care of all the IT services through the airports of India, Middle East, and mainly in Africa. Next, please. Okay, the case study I have selected is for the Beijing International Airport. Why Beijing? Because we wanted to show how this technology of face recognition is being used at a very, very busy airport, the second busiest in the world, and accessing millions of passengers, hundreds of millions of passengers a year. The airport had a challenge. They wanted to facilitate the passenger processing. They wanted to facilitate the experience of the passenger through this very busy airport. At the same time, they wanted a solution that is easy to implement and that works across all the airlines without the need to integrate with any different airline. And that came also, took a big advantage and a big interest after COVID-19 for the safety and the contactless, as we will see in the coming slide, as we will explain. So, okay. What is the solution about? We call it a smart path in SITA. Smart path is about using your face to go through the airport at all these steps of the passenger journey. How it works, first you have to enroll. Enroll means you scan your passport, you take your face picture, and you have your boarding pass. And these three data will be linked together, and we create what is called a passenger token. This passenger token will match your face with your boarding pass, with your passport details. So your face becomes your boarding pass, and your face becomes your passport. The enrollment can be done at any stage, can be done through your mobile phone, can be done at the counter at the airport, at the kiosk at the airport, at any stage when you access the airport. And the solution then will work with any airline, easy to integrate, will work with the immigration, with the government when you access the gate during the process. So by showing your face, you just access every step at the airport, from the check-in to the security, to boarding the plane, to the duty-free, to boarding the plane, like that. The application will provide APIs, so as I mentioned, easy to integrate, and it is GDPR compliant, which is very important. Next slide, please. So I will not explain a lot about Beijing because there is a film at the end of 3 minutes who will take you through the whole process. You will be seeing how this face recognition technology is being implemented. But at the end of this project, there is efficiency in the passenger processing. There is a contactless experience for the passenger. When we speak about efficiency, to give you an idea about the speed, you can board in 20 minutes an airport 380 with 400 passengers. And since it is contactless, the people at the airport will concentrate on servicing the needs of the passenger instead of doing the normal processing. So that was an idea about how the face recognition will be used at the airport through the whole passenger journey. There is a film of 3 minutes that will be self-explanatory, and at the end I will be happy to answer your queries. So let's start the film, please.
Beijing Capital International Airport is Asia's busiest airport and the second busiest in the world, serving more than 100 million passengers a year. To deliver an outstanding passenger experience, the airport's bold ambition was to design future-proof solutions by evaluating the latest technologies in the market and selecting SITA SmartPath to serve passengers at different touchpoints.
The biggest initiative is, of course, creating a more seamless passenger journey or passenger experience. So the passengers going through an airport to seamlessly move from end to end and go through the physical touch points with as little friction as possible.
こちらの今の皆さんで進めていただいているこのスマートエアポート化、これが進むことによってお客様がスムースにご搭乗手続きができること、さらには搭乗口ボーディングゲートでもストレスフリーにご搭乗いただけるということで、お客様にとっては非常に素晴らしい空の旅のスタートが切れるということだと思っております。
Biometrics is an enabling technology. It's a technology that started within the border control and now is moving into other physical touch points within the airport.
The self-service check-in process is reduced to just a few seconds. At the same time, airlines don't need to change their existing software. It couldn't be simpler. The passenger checks in at SITA's intuitive kiosk, which quickly takes their photo and matches their face with the photo in their passport or ID. Once confirmed, SmartPath creates a secure, single travel token. For passengers checking in at an airport desk or bag drop, SmartPath again makes it easy to create their single travel token. A quick glance at the camera, and the process is complete. The passenger's face is now their boarding pass. SITA's self-service bag drop, known as Drop and Fly, is a simple and quick process. Passengers glance into the camera to verify their identity, with no need to present a boarding pass. Flight details collected at check-in automatically update the self-service bag drop. The passenger just needs to attach the easy-to-use bag tag received at check-in and place their bag on the conveyor belt. Now airline agents have more time to help other passengers and create an even better customer experience. As passengers move towards the security checkpoint, they simply look into the camera at the entrance of the restricted zone. Once their face confirms with the record created at check-in, the gate opens and off they go. At the security checkpoint, the same process is repeated. Time to board the aircraft. Once again, passengers just need to quickly glance at the camera. In less than 5 seconds, the boarding pass is verified, and SmartPath automatically updates the airline's departure control system. When everything is in order, the gate opens and the passenger boards their flight. SmartPath reduces overall boarding times and improves the experience for passengers and operational efficiencies for airlines.
Very good. We have only time for one question, but in the meantime, Jihad, it wasn't so clear to me in your video. You are doing one-to-many, right? You're not doing just authentication of faces. The person does not need to utilize a token when they're boarding. Is that correct?
What we mean in the enrollment, the face is captured, the passport is scanned, and in the server, there is a token created which links the face to the passport to the boarding pass. So when the passenger goes through any point, as we have seen in the film, just by showing his face, the information about his boarding pass and his passport will be sent to the airline host, or will be sent to immigration if it is at the gate of immigration.
Right, but they don't need to show a boarding pass and verify the face against it. Simply, they just...
Yes, exactly. They don't need to. This is the aim. The aim is to be paperless, and they just show their face. In some airports, they insist to double check, but in general, as a technology, it works without showing anything.
Okay, so that's the future. The future would be no additional token. Your face becomes your passport and your
boarding pass, exactly.
Okay, that's something that we will explore in the future because the error dimension would be interesting to see if you mix with somebody else, etc. But we don't have time today. Thank you very much, Jihad, for this interesting presentation. I want to move to the next application, which I believe is from Tech 5. Rahul, are you on?
I'm on. My video has been disabled, so I'll request the host to allow.
Yes, please bring Rahul back on video. Sorry about that. You're there. Okay, please.
First of all, I would like to thank Dr. Addick and ID for Africa for giving us the opportunity to talk about our use case. This is again one of the non-controversial use of face technology as we have seen it. And we being in this field and industry see a lot of value of face, and that's what I'm going to talk about. Please go to the next slide. I'll give a quick introduction of who I am and what our company does. So as you can see, the company's name is Technology for Inclusion, Teki A. We started this company or co-founded this company with the whole principle of considering inclusion and making sure that the digital identity is in the controls of the owners. This is only for the credibility's sake that I have been involved personally in very large scale programs, and all the results that we talk about in the use case comes from a real study that has been done under these programs. So we have more than 350 million active identities, processing 200,000 transactions per day. And the programs that I've been involved with are at least, a few 100 million, and some of them are about 50 million. Yeah. So if you go to the next slide. So the problem statement was, how do we use face recognition in a traditional national ID deduplication scenario? The program that I'm going to talk about actually started 10 years ago when face was considered as a secondary biometric. Fingerprint and iris was given the primary weightage in the deduplication process. And as Patrick has already covered and mentioned, is that face has evolved significantly in the last decade. And I would say in the last 5 years, we have seen that face can probably play a big role in such a program or use case. The customer that we are talking about, as I said, did make a good move of enrolling ICAO compliant images. And we're talking about 196 million people enrolled and ongoing. So the whole objective was to see how we can use facial recognition in cases where you cannot use face or fingerprint to do this deduplication and stop whatever fraud or issues with the deduplication that may arise because of this shortcoming. Next slide, please. So the use of facial recognition in national ID, as I said, one may ask, why wouldn't a person have his fingerprints or iris captured during enrollment? Because the typical enrollment scenarios in such large scale system would be you capture face, you capture 10 fingerprints, and then you capture irises. Now the issue is, of course, because of quality. There may be reasons why people do not have good quality fingerprints or iris, especially due to age and the demographics. Then there are operational or systematic errors where the operators mark somebody is an exception. When I say an exception, means does not have capturable fingerprints or iris, or it could purely be a fraud where the operator is colluding with the enrollment citizen and then trying to bypass the system by not offering the biometrics that are used for deduplication. The reason why we use face is because that was the only available modality in this case of deduplication. The other reason was that it is now accurate and we believe that it would solve the problem. It requires very less hardware these days. The hardware footprint requirements have gone down. And last but not least, any citizen that enrolls, primarily, even if they're trying to fraud, they usually do not avoid giving their face because it is printed on the card. So you have to have a face, number one. Number two, most of these services for visual verification as well as authentication services use face these days. So avoiding face was a little tricky for some of these fraudsters. So what we did, we had 196 million records, of which we filtered down based on the above criteria. People who do not have fingerprint or iris, people who have fingerprint or iris are low quality, or somebody is suspicious like one fingerprint only or one iris only kind of scenario. We filtered out 4 million plus records, which is about 2% of the total population. Then we did a full face only deduplication. It took us about 448 hours. You can imagine this is 784 trillion comparisons. We used 3 off-the-shelf computers, CPUs with 16 cores. What we ended up doing is we set up a threshold at a log far of 10 that resulted in 1.25% duplicates from the 4 million subset, which basically means an effective duplicates that were found was 0.025% of the total population. Next slide, please. Okay. Now, one would say, yeah, it's only 0.025% of the population, but then you have to look at from the perspective of, you know, all fraudulently created IDs are stealing from the citizens, yeah, from the other genuine citizens. So stopping this fraud and putting some deterrent is always the goal of a national ID system like this. So what we have been able to do is that we have been able to clean up the database. When I say clean up, is find the duplicate suspicious cases. And we've been able to create this deterrent and actually close the loophole, which lets these citizens or fraudsters try to defraud the system one or the other way. Of course, the other benefits that come with the good quality face enrollment and de-duplication is that it provides the secondary services based on the national ID, like eKYC. Then you have the cases where somebody loses their IDs, grievance services. They could use facial recognition instead of fingerprint for a lot of reasons that Patrick has already mentioned for the ease and social acceptance. And last but not least, it has also been used in scenarios for natural disasters where for whatever reasons, the other biometrics were not available for matching. What actually ended up by doing this, we were able to, you know, find and manually verify a statistically significant portion of the database or duplicates found, and then they were decimated to the local authorities to confirm and take corrective action. We go to the next slide. So what are the takeaways? Again, I don't want to repeat everything that Patrick said because he pretty much covered all the questions I would have in mind or somebody would ask me. Yes, I mean, face is no more a secondary biometric. We, as a company, since we have face, finger, and iris, are actively doing our internal research to benchmark these against each other. What we have found so far, and I'm speaking in purely practical scenarios, that a face recognition algorithm is pretty much equivalent to a two-finger AFIS from an accuracy perspective, including failure to captures, failure to enroll factors included. So it already shows that, you know, there were those days when two-finger systems were used for many large-scale programs. Now you could, in theory, use fingerprints, of course, considering the fact that you cannot be separate twins. On the other hand, what this also helped us and, you know, is helping the local government to do is that change the whole aspect perspective towards fingerprint, not using fingerprint as the only modality for deduplication / you know, use face for conclusive decision if a person is duplicate or not. And last but not least, I would say the face has proven its efficacy, so we are offering this as a standard offering, you know, in our deduplication system for national IDs, and I'm sure that many governments will consider the same. So with that, I would like to conclude our short presentation and take any questions you may have.
Thank you, Rahul. There is a question for you. Basically, somebody in the audience was wondering, were there multiple images of the same person associated with the same record, or was it just one image per person associated with the record?
So it's a typical fraud case where people try to enroll with a different identity and try to get a duplicate card. So it is one person, one face, but two different identities.
Okay, but in terms of the program, the program does take only one photo of the individual.
Yes, it takes one picture of the person at every enrollment instance.
Okay, so you don't have a notion of multiple photos with using the latest photo versus an older photo. This is not a recidivist program. This is just one enrollment, one photo.
Yes, ideally we would love to have that, but as you can imagine, the scales and then the cost involved in the in the approach lets you you have to work with one-time pictures that were captured at the first instance.
Right. Okay. Just one last point. Can you mention what is the profile of the country that did this? Is this a developing country? Is this a developed country? Can you say just quickly what this is?
Yes, it is a developing country. I think it's one of the leading economies in the Asian, part of the world, and it has a very successful program. So, as I said, the only credit I will give is that they started to capture ICAO compliant pictures from the get-go, which is a big advantage.
Okay. Thank you very much, Rahul. We ran out of time. I think we're going to continue to the next case study, which I believe is Innovatrics now. Operator, please bring Innovatrics on.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me to this conference. It's an honor to be here. I would like to focus on the way how we used facial recognition in election. More specifically, how we use it for trusted voters registration. Next, please. My name is Matúš Kapusta. I work at Innovatrics as a head of government unit. Innovatrics is a biometric technology company. I joined Innovatrics at 2008, and that's when I joined biometric business. The first African project we did in 2010, it was in Nigeria. It was focused on ghost workers among government employees. It was in Nigeria, in Mina State. We did also enrollment and issuance of cards. Then first APHIS focused on election. We did together with a system integrator in Burkina Faso 9 years ago. Then we did a similar project in Guinea for the first time in 2015. It was still based on fingerprints, but in 2017 things have changed a lot. We have developed our own facial recognition, and the first large-scale project was in Indonesia, where we deployed a solution for 180 million population, faces and fingerprints together for Indonesian police. In 2019, Innovatrics was chosen as a solution provider for Guinean election. We have provided the complete solution, including the software for enrollment station and central site. For 2020, this solution was reused, and Innovatrics acts as an international operator for presidential election in Guinea. Elections are scheduled on October 2020. Next, please. Our customer in Guinea is CENI. CENI is an acronym for National Independent Electoral Committee. It's a committee which is responsible for election organization in the country. All elections, including local elections, parliamentary elections, presidential elections. There are 20 commissioners, and all relevant political parties are represented in the committee. We have about 7 million eligible voters. The enrollment is done within a period of approximately 20 days on 4,000 mobile stations across the country. And there is a central voter registry, and we have provided a solution for collecting the data from mobile stations for de-duplication, which is done by our ABIS. ABIS means Automated Biometric Identification System, where we use fingerprint and face, and then a reporting module where we have to print a couple of millions pages of electoral reports and voters' ID cards. Our responsibility is to deliver the solution which provides every registered and eligible voter with one valid ID card, which will result into one vote in election. Traditional solution is with fingerprints. It's proven for more than 10 years, but recently we have faced some issues. And the first issue is that we have seen a lot of cards, a lot of voters with two valid voters card. Even if we did a deduplication, there were still some duplicates. And this has various reasons. It can be the failure of the deduplication. For example, the fingerprints are very low quality, or there's insufficient number of fingerprints enrolled. Also, when we use the textual deduplication, in this case, in French language, especially the transcription is very variable. So it was not easy to do the textual deduplication, and illiteracy rate in Guinea among especially old people is up to 80%. So sometimes the people, they have difficulties to pronounce and spell their names and the names of their parents. Also, the date of birth is very unreliable, and there are no reliable birth certificates in the country. Very often, this happened also when there was a failure in the enrollment. For example, operators, they did some shortcuts. They wanted to do the job, make their job easier, so they skip enrollment fingerprints intentionally. Sometimes we have also seen inconsistent enrollment. So the operator enrolled face and fingerprints from different person. Why this is a problem? On the voter's card, we have just the facial photo. In Guinea, we have more than 10,000 polling stations, and there is no technology for biometric verification. The only verification is done by the local committee, where we verify the face on the card with the actual face of the voter. So it is very important to create a trusted voter registry. Please, next slide. Our solution to this problem was introduction of the face recognition technology to the existing solution with fingerprints. First of all, we did a general one-to-all search based on face for every voter. This has a pretty good accuracy. Even some of the data are pretty low quality, but we have found a lot of duplicates. Then we focus on the people without fingerprints, where it did the same job, but with a lower threshold. It's a smaller group, so we found another duplicates and without a lot of false matches. Then we did also an extra check for voters which are inside the same voting centers, usually those people from the same location, again with a lower threshold, and we combined facial and textual deduplication together. We have our interface, which allows the operator to analyze the duplicate cases and to decide based on scores and textual similarity about whether it is a match or not. Our key findings are that operator, they register people without fingerprint intentionally. We have seen the same people with and without the fingerprints. We have improved the enrollment software, so it's not easy to register somebody without fingerprints, and the ratio was significantly reduced from approximately 2% to 0.35. We have seen a lot of enrollment with the same face, but different fingers. We have identified approximately thousands of duplicates, and we have removed them from the electoral list. And it's also important, it's very important to train operator on those specific cases, because if they will consider them as a standard duplicates, they can be easily mistaken as identical twins instead of being the regular duplicates. It's not, sometimes it's not easy to recognize what is identical twin as a hit and what is the real duplicate registration. Please, next slide.
Please.
The next issue, which was presented also widely in the local media, was the presence of children in the electoral list. This is something which is very visible. As you can see, there is a electoral card from 2015. You can see the young boy, and this is a big issue. Apparent children were enrolled with fake IDs. there is no trusted system for identity card. And this problem was strongly reflected, and the political parties were blaming each other that they are registering children to increase their number of votes for the party. And the credibility of the electoral process was threatened.
Matúš, please wrap up. Your time is up.
Okay. Next slide, can I?
Just quickly.
Okay, so we developed the module for minor detection, where we trained our algorithm, which was able to identify something we call minor similarity score. And for every voter which was registered, we have calculated minor similarity score. And if the minor similarity score was above the threshold, we have removed the person from the electoral registry, either automatically or manually based on the threshold. And we have found approximately 70,000 of minors which were removed. And in some regions, it was up to 3% of the population. And this was successfully validated by operators and also audit from ECOWAS.
It's fantastic. It's a unique application of face where it's not just recognizing people, but it's actually recognizing that they are minors and therefore they shouldn't be on the electoral list. Sorry, we ran out of time for you. Thank you, Matúš, for your contribution. And then please, operator, bring the last case study, which is from Veridos. While we're bringing that, I also want to tell you, stick around because we're going to do a quick poll after the Veridos presentation, and then we're going to start a debate. So please, Susanne.
I'm here. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present here my case study on mobile ID. So please go to the next slide. From birth and throughout your entire life, identity matters. So we know that it's very important for governments and border control agencies to provide secure identities to citizens and also secure the whole life cycle of identities so that citizens can have access to services and also participate in society and an economy. We as Veridos provide build-wide identity solutions to the governments, like identity documents, border control solutions, and e-government services. I myself work in the innovations department of Veridos, and I'm developing new products, especially related to biometrics. Next slide, please. Imagine the following problem. You plan a holiday trip abroad, you book your flight, and then you find out your passport is invalid. Next slide, please. So imagine even it's a Friday evening, so you have to at least wait until Monday for the opening hours of your registration office. Then you prepare all your documents, and then finally you can visit the office and apply for a new passport. Next. So once the document then is ready, again, you can schedule a visit at the office, and then you finally go there. So this obviously is usually consuming quite a lot of time. And also it might involve travel costs for the citizen to go to the office. Next. So we developed an application called Verigo True ID, where we especially want to simplify the application process for the citizens. So it's an app. It can be downloaded from a Google Play Store. It's therefore instantly accessible. It shows a clear process, so you exactly know which documents you want to provide. And therefore, you don't need to visit the government office for the application, you just use the app. So of course, this no visit to the government office must be accepted by a government. And we were fortunate to find a pilot customer which was willing to change their policies in order to enable that. Also, in the current times of the pandemics, it's a good solution to reduce visits to crowded places to ensure safety of citizens. Next. So we use face matching to verify the identity of the citizen. So the citizen takes a selfie via the smartphone. The selfie is then sent to servers on the government side, and there it's matched against a reference picture from a national biometric database. That can, for example, be the identity document database. When the match is positive, the citizens get a confirmation, and then they are allowed to use the service, like, for example, renewing of a passport. This service can be also realized, or this authentication, with another technology, but we believe that face recognition technology here offers a very broad power because it's highly convenient for the user. They do not have to register in advance, and they immediately can use the service when they need it. Also, we make sure that it's a secure process, so we have liveness detection to secure the capture of the image, and of course also the channel towards the government, and that they is encrypted and the data is secured when it's sent. Next. Here you see an example how the solution can look like. So as a citizen, in a first step, you download the app, then you select a service like, for example, passport. Then a second step, you have an option to renew your passport. In a third step, you're asked to enter a unique identification number. That number then later on is used to identify the record in the national database where also your biometric images. In a fourth step, you get instructions on the face recognition technology, how to perform the face matching. Then in a fifth step, you take your selfie. In a sixth step, you are asked to pay. And then finally, you get a confirmation whether your application was done successfully. Next, please. We have performed a pilot project last year. It was an internal pilot with a customer in Europe. And the use case was the renewal of driver licenses. So the customer approved also a change of policy in order to enable that service. So in the current process, when citizens apply for a new driver license, they physically have to sign the application. So this physical signature could be removed to the last step of the process, meaning to the pickup of the document. So the application process could be completely done digitally, and therefore such an application can be used. Also, our customer does own the national biometric databases, and therefore they expect that they can offer it also as a GDPR compliant service when it really comes to a countrywide rollout. And also the customer gave us positive feedback, so they see that they can use this solution also for other services like scheduling an appointment, reporting lost or stolen documents, and also to enable other driver licenses services. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Susan. We've got a couple of questions for you from the audience. First question, is Verigo True ID ICAO compliant?
Currently, no. So with our pilot customer, there is not an obligation to renew the picture. So we did not address the step yet. However, this is a very important topic, how to ensure that you really also exchange the picture. There are different possibilities. One possibility could be also to work together with a photographer lobby. They are allowed to take ICAO compliant pictures and to ensure the channel from the photographer, so they take it and securely send it to the government. So then you really have a picture there.
A second question for you is, where is the face print stored? Is the mobile or in the cloud server?
So the face matching itself, of course, is performed at the server side, also for security reasons. So we just capture the selfie and then send it to the server, and there perform the matching. So the image from the database never leaves the database. This would not be possible for security reasons.
Okay. And basically, this is a derived identity, but you have to have the national identity database against which you are going to be confirming. You can't just onboard anybody.
Exactly, yes. This is an issue. It will work with countries that already have national biometric databases, which if you look at it worldwide, there are quite a lot. But if you don't have it, you have to think about different services to enable such service. Still, we see a benefit for the countries who have this national biometric database, because it's a service they easily can add on and can immediately use it as citizens are already registered in a secure way.
Right. It's a new service based on an identity that they already captured. So it's fantastic.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. No more questions. Thank you very much, Susan, for this overview. I'd like to ask the operator to run a poll very quickly. Okay. So we'd like you to vote very quickly on two questions. The first question is, compared with other biometrics, how do you see face recognition threat to your privacy? En comparaison aux autres modalités biométriques, comment voyez-vous la menace de la reconnaissance faciale sur votre vie privée? Higher threat, since it can be done without my knowledge. menace plus élevée étant donné que la reconnaissance faciale peut être faite à mon insu. Same as the other biometrics, la même qu'avec les autres modalités biométriques. Less than other biometrics since it uses my face, which is public. Moins que les autres modalités biométriques puisqu'elle utilise mon visage qui est public. Okay, so please vote. And we want to move to the next question, but I'll let that settle a little bit until 60%. Okay. Okay. Let's stop the poll and move to the next one. Record the number, record the result. 59% believe this is a higher threat. 22% believe it's the same threat as the other modalities. And then 19% believe this is less since it uses public information. Okay. Keep that in mind. We're going to use that. Please run the next question. Okay. What do you think is the best way to safeguard against misuse of face recognition technology? Quel est, à votre avis, le meilleur moyen de se prémunir contre une mauvaise utilisation de la reconnaissance faciale? You have three choices. Legislation specific to face recognition is needed to regulate how the technology is used. Une législation spécifique à la reconnaissance faciale est nécessaire afin de réglementer la façon dont la technologie est utilisée. Or general data protection laws are sufficient and apply to all biometrics, including face. Des lois générales de protection des données sont suffisantes et s'appliquent à toutes les modalités biométriques, y compris les visages. Industry self-regulation is sufficient. L'autorégulation de l'industrie est suffisante. Okay, please vote. This is an important question and it's going to inform our dialogue. Okay. Fantastic. I think we can end the polling here. 60% believe legislation, 38% believe data protection is enough, and then 2% believe industry self-regulation. Okay, this is very, very interesting. Okay, now set those apart, and please, operators, bring in the last section of the panel, which is Pam, Dixon, and Teki Falconer. Hello.
Bon après-midi, Joseph, et merci beaucoup.
I'm happy to have both of you here. You've been patient, you went through and listened to the limitations of the technology, and you've heard some positive applications of the technology, and you also heard about what our audience believes about the threat of face recognition and what we should be doing about it. So let me start this session by asking Pam the following question, and then I'll funnel a variant of it to Teki. There's not a single day that passes without me opening up the newspapers or online and seeing a headline about face recognition. It continues to be attracting a lot of headlines, mostly positive, mostly negative around the world. Some localities are even, and countries are trying to ban it or restrict it. Why do you think this is happening, in your opinion? Do you think we have, we're not arriving at an informed dialogue, or do you think there is a real threat here and something needs to be done about it?
I think both are true. I do believe that the science is now in regards to face technologies. And we now know that there is significant risk of both age, gender, and racial utilizations that are biased and unfair. So this is a problem that needs to be grappled with, and it has not yet been grappled with. This is particularly true in the law enforcement context. And I think that is the other reason that you see people being very concerned and quite vocal, is that a lot of the uses that are the most objectionable carry the most risk, which is law enforcement use that is not by consent and it is mandatory. So when people feel like they don't have choices and they don't have autonomy, they tend to have very emotional responses, which gets to your question about, you know, is this hype, etc. I don't think it's hype. I just think that it's a very emotional response, the move to bans and whatnot. And governments are going to have to listen a lot more. And I think there's going to have to be a center found. I don't think the dialogue is completely informed yet, but at the same time, I also think there are a lot of risks that are not being addressed.
Hold on to that thought. Let me go to Teki and let's get the view from the continent. I mean, Teki, what about Africa? Do you think face recognition is making negative headlines there? And what is the nature of the concerns that people have in Africa that go beyond what, let's say, Pam has said for the rest of the world?
Definitely on top of the list for Africa is racial bias. And we're very much aware of the findings. And as Patrick highlighted, you would see some demographic changes. And we know the impact that has had on people of African descent. And that is really a high risk there. Another major concern has also been around the political landscape of Africa being a maturing democracy and the ability to actually have governments overset themselves and more or less limit some other rights like the right to freedom of expression and other issues. So there's also been a lot of concerns because we currently see deployment in the security sector as well, where national security agencies are deploying facial recognition technologies. And there's always a concern of some form of covert surveillance as well, which is a big issue. The third one has to do with the whole issue around data sovereignty. Most of these technologies are not being developed by organizations or companies that are African oriented or country specific. They are being developed by developed countries, and most of these companies are there and are subject to laws in developed countries. And so there's also that concern around whether this is another form of neocolonialism whereby, you know, information is being collected on Africans to train these AI systems, but at the end of the day, it could be used, you know, to undermine our political systems or the independence of these countries. So these are a number of issues that are coming up. And of course, the privacy angle of it, the transparency issues around what is being deployed, how it's being used, and who has access to it. All these come into play when we're talking about facial technologies in Africa.
It's quite actually a rich and complex set of concerns when you add sovereignty, when you add the potential for the public feeling that this is a new version of colonialism, etc., without them understanding potentially the benefits. I'd like to pose you both for a second and ask somebody from the community, anybody that wants to join the panel from the community voices, to join specifically about this issue, which is we're still talking about, which is why should there be concerns about face recognition in Africa or in the world in general? So anybody that wants to join the panel, operator, please elevate them as a panelist. You have to turn on your video because we have here total transparency. You can't speak without your face being shown. No pun intended. Anybody, I see somebody raise their hand, they want to join the panel to talk about why we should be concerned about face recognition and why the headlines perhaps are justified in painting this concern. Operator, could you please elevate the individual to community voice? Apology, they're having problems bringing that person up.
Hello, I'm here, thank you.
Okay, please introduce yourself. I've never met you before, but I'm pleased to see you with us.
met you before, Joseph Fatigue. This is Paul Macharia. I'm based in Kenya.
Paul, Kenya. Sorry. I'm sorry. It's been a long day. So hi, Paul.
It's okay. Hi, how are you? I'm happy to be here. Yeah, I think in my experience working with biometrics, especially in the healthcare setting, I think the concern is fear of the unknown. Maybe there are many unknowns in this emerging technology, but in my other thinking also, it's what now COVID-19 and other circumstances are making us work with, because now contact-based biometrics seem to be not very acceptable, for lack of a better word, when we use biometrics for identification in like the healthcare setting. Infection control is a big concern. Thanks.
Now, so in fact, Paul, you're advocating something positive. You're basically saying, in fact, we need face in the health arena because of these restrictions on contacting surfaces. If I understood that's your comment, that yes, there are concerns, but in fact, we shouldn't forget that there are certain legitimate needs, such as the use of face in health in order to avoid contamination and contacting surfaces. Do I understand you correctly, Paul?
That's what I mean, Dr. Atik, that we need face recognition in a healthcare setting because of the biggest concern, infection control.
Okay, so now, Teki, going back to you, we see that obviously the concerns that you've raised are legitimate concerns, but when I talk to a doctor who is actually in the field dealing with infections and disease, he would be saying that, yes, I understand, but my priority is dealing with managing the identity of sick patients, and therefore I could afford to take the risks that you mentioned. And do you think this is a short-term vision, or there are certain justifications for using face because of the world that we're in right now and the fact that we need to be in a contactless environment?
Joseph, clearly there is a good reason to use face. And of course, having started on the basis of the risks does not mean that we cannot use face. But the challenge is that there is really no transparency around when we should use face and when we should not. Clearly, we should attribute the risks associated, which has been identified and raised by Patrick, and that should inform the context under which we're going to use face, for instance. Yes, if there is a health risk and there is the need to use face, it is acceptable, but we must put it within a context that continues to protect the individual in place and minimizes risk to other areas. So the fact that, using facial technology will enable a doctor do or perform their services better, or enable us protect the larger society. If you're looking at COVID, and in this case, let's say that somebody has COVID and they are supposed to stay at a particular place to minimize the infection, then you look at the greater good. But the challenge has always been for the continent around the lack of, call it a framework that really provides this form of guidance, and the likelihood that now some businesses are thinking about deployment of biometric technologies, including facial technologies. For instance, we have some banks that are using it. Under what context are they planning to deploy it? Is this sufficient reason? Is that a good reason, or could there be other methods that will minimize the risk associated with the use of facial technologies? So I'm not necessarily against the use of these technologies, but I believe that the context should define when we should use them.
Okay, that's great. So Pam, we're now getting into the nuances. What we're basically saying that, you know, the technology is not good or bad. It's the use cases that could be bad and that we should protect society from them, if I understand where we're heading. What is the process for a community or for a country? And obviously cultural influences could be different, one continent, one country to another. How do you go about establishing what are acceptable uses of face recognition? And do we have any sort of experiences from the past for something similar that we can rely on, any models that we can rely on?
Yes, I think there are a lot of models that could be used. Right now, they're not being used though. So that is one of the reasons we're seeing so much chaos in terms of policy. So I think one of the important things we have to mention are bans and moratoriums. Also best practices. We see a lot of best practices written. We also see an increasing number of bans in certain jurisdictions. But there's a big, giant middle section which has really been left alone, and that is where all the richness and personalization, if you will, is done. And this comes in the form of the model of safety regulations. So if you think about dangerous chemicals, one can think of lead, for example. Lead is actually not a banned substance. In Africa, there are very stringent rules in regards to lead, and paint must have only a 90%, it must be 90% lead free. These are rules in most African countries. And very similarly, face recognition can have rules that include risk minimization, risk assessments, certifications, required documentations. After it's been put on the market, there would be ongoing surveillance or observation by regulatory authorities, such as data protection authorities and others. And in this way, you can start to build a very robust framework of protections when all the stakeholders agree that face recognition is appropriate to use. But not all use cases are going to be appropriate. And that is, I think, what Teki's really talking about. The community and those unique situations need to be decided by the stakeholders that are there. And it is when governments and businesses and others make just autocratic decisions that creates real tensions in the use of any technology, but especially face recognition. So the trust has to be earned here.
Yes, I understand. But you know, who does that role? I mean, when we look at harmful material, I mean, we've got bodies like the Food and Drug Administration, which basically does not allow any consumable to go on the market without them classifying it or categorizing it. In any given country, if we think about face recognition in that context, who do you think is the right body to pronounce that this is harmful in this application and will not be allowed in our country, or this is acceptable? What body is that? It's not just data protection.
No, it's not just data protection. I think there are going to have to be multi-stakeholder groups that come together within governments to make these determinations. But I would say that data protection authorities must be present. And in countries where there are not yet data protection authorities, then someone with that kind of expertise needs to be present. And the role of civil society is very important here. Civil society needs to provide feedback and expertise, as do all of the stakeholders. But it really needs to be a very respectful and productive conversation. I think one of the problems that exists right now is this very adversarial lack of communication. And I think it's just adding to the problem rather than solving the problem.
Yeah, okay. So pause here for a second. I want to elevate somebody from the community to join the conversation on this specific topic. I understand there is a candidate that raised their hand. Please, operator, elevate this candidate. And we're continuing essentially to talk about how we can establish if certain applications, certain use cases of face recognition are legitimate for the community. It seems that there is a vacuum right now in many countries. There is no body that's already established, so we have to do it on an ad hoc basis. Stakeholders, civil society, government regulators. Yes, please introduce yourself. Unmute your microphone. Who do we have with us?
Hello.
Yes.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, please.
Hello. Hi, my name is Chastity Wright. I am the founder and CTO of Infiltron Software Suite. And we have our social responsibility aspect of our functionality is to mitigate issues around race and gender equality. And we're currently doing some development around being able to accurately detect transgender people as well. But to speak to what we're talking about right now, I'm actually getting ready to do a presentation for AI Expo Africa tomorrow on this very subject of being able to provide cybersecurity and equality in biometric technology. So one of the things that I did, because I like to hold myself accountable, not only as a technologist, but as a business owner and as a Black person in this space, I created some international trademarks that would speak to the government and legislative aspects of what should happen around biometric technology. So essentially, if anyone develops biometric technologies, whether it's facial recognition, if it does not have functionalities that mitigate race and gender equality built into them, they should not be used. It's just that simple. It's just that direct. But there should be an auditing body or some type of accreditation body per government around the world that does this.
So it's basically this concept.
And if you guys want me to share my screen, I can't do that. Yeah.
No. Okay, it's okay. This is not the
correct.
Not an important
but
message. This is the do no harm of the application. Essentially, what you're talking about, we cannot allow an application in society which harms a certain group of society in the society.
Correct, okay. Joseph. Absolutely correct.
Okay, thank you.
And it starts with the development teams as well. It starts with the development teams. The development teams themselves need to be diverse so they can in turn show diversity in the development, the software that's being developed itself.
Right. One last question to you. Where do you come to us from? Which country?
I am in Atlanta, Georgia, in the United States.
Welcome, welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me on, guys.
Thank you. Okay, we want to continue this discussion. We thank our guest. I'll continue the discussion with Pam and Teki. Now, so go back to the second, and I want to look at the numbers in front of me so I don't cite it. We asked the question, what was, in your opinion, is the best way to deal with the menace, potential menace of face recognition? The first question, 60% of people felt that there was an elevated menace, more than other biometrics. And so we asked what was the best way to deal with that menace. And 60% believe that there has to be laws specific to face recognition. 38% said no, data protection laws are enough. And then only 2% believed in industry self-regulation. I will relate to you the results that I had done. I had done this survey in London about 5 years ago. And I can tell you that industry self-regulation at that time was at 22%. 22% believed that industry self-regulation was enough. Today, we are essentially seeing that nobody is advocating for industry self-regulation. So we move that out of the equation. So we focus on whether it is laws specific to face or whether it is just data protection. So let me start with Teki this time and get your perspective. Do you really agree that we should be working with legislators to make sure there is an informed face policy, or should we be putting our energy to inform their data protection laws?
I believe it's actually both. I wish the survey had given me the option to prioritize. In fact, from where I sit, I think it's all three: industry regulation, some form of regulation attributed to technology, and then data protection. The reason I'm saying this is because data protection, of course, has the overall, but then it has a very specific role, which is looking at the individual, the personal data and use of it, and transparency around it, accuracy, and the rest. But as I mentioned, when you look at the African context, there are other bigger issues around data sovereignty. There are other issues around manipulation to limit other fundamental rights. And so you would actually see that you probably may need, and I agree with Pam, you may need a broader scope of stakeholders to address each of these issues that continue to be a concern. Legislation is a good start, but I honestly do not believe that it is sufficient. And especially looking at the context in Africa, if, for instance, where are all these technological companies? Ownership of these technologies, where are they based? They are not based in Africa. They're not based in Ghana or any of our 55 countries. Most of them are not based there. So even if you look at a regulatory intervention by way of law, you have to enforce these laws against these companies. And you may not have the necessary structures and tools to be able to go after these, especially the big tech giants. So for Africa, we really need to sit down and look beyond them and look at where the real issues are and create some form of system or framework that brings to play the laws and the regulations which will enable some form of regulators, but rather build a larger ecosystem that recognizes certain values as far as these technologies are concerned and are willing to apply these values for the greater good of everyone.
Teki, wonderful, wonderful overview of what you think should be happening. Pam, instead of repeating that, could you give us an overview of what is actually happening in some countries around the world? How are they dealing with this situation? Are there models that Africa could use to guide what the next steps should be, perhaps along the lines of what Teki is mentioned?
Yes, I think that it's very important to understand that most countries are moving ahead with uses of face recognition in law enforcement and national security context, period, end of discussion. This is without discussion, typically with citizenry, and without discussion of specific use cases. And this is leading to increasing tensions. But I, again, am going to point to a certain powerlessness that people feel when this happens. And I do think this is of concern. The second thing I would say is that because of the impact of COVID-19, we're also seeing a lot of movement toward the use of face systems so that there's no touching involved. But I urge caution here because we need to ensure that all of the use cases have been run through and discussed amongst all stakeholders, including citizens, those who are not citizens, but within the country, government officials and so forth. But the thing is that what we also are seeing is a real breakdown. Teki mentioned something very important, which is the idea of, something very practical that governments, stakeholders, companies, et cetera, can implement on the ground. So I myself do not prefer self-regulation. It's very failure prone, but I do like the idea of regulator approved codes of conduct that have oversight to them so that everyone who's supposed to be subject to the code behaves. We're seeing some of this in Africa coming from Morocco and also Mauritius. And I believe, and Teki, please let me know, I know there are other African countries that are also looking at doing regulator approved codes of conduct. This is a really important area of development that I think is right for Africa.
I mean, Teki, what is the United States doing in this area? You're based in the United States. What are they doing? We hear a lot of local and state creating contradictory things and bills that are competing? What's happening? Very quickly.
You mean me?
Yeah, yes, the question to you. I mean, the United States.
The US is an absolute mess right now because we're seeing a policy structure that focuses on bans that are very limited actually in scope and also best practices. So the actual middle ground where you really need controls such as certification audits, as the guest was mentioning, and all of those really robust safety mechanisms and controls, those are not being discussed. So we're avoiding, in the United States, we're avoiding looking at the whole life cycle of facial recognition. We're avoiding looking at the whole ecosystem of face recognition systems. This is a huge gap, a huge problem, and there's a lot of misunderstanding about what is and what is not a problem. And I must say the tone is deeply adversarial, and that's a problem. We need to be able to talk to each other and find a center.
Pause. I want to elevate somebody to the panel that I think will be a firework as well. Operator, please elevate Maxime. Pam, maybe you can briefly, while we're elevating Maxime, tell us what's happening in Europe.
Europe is very interesting. We had France regulators say, hey, look, the schools in the south of France, you are not going to be able to install face recognition for children. You also see the Information Commissioner's Office at the UK making an announcement that they are going to be looking, and it's a very brave announcement, they're going to be looking at regulating and controlling law enforcement uses, certain law enforcement uses of facial recognition technology. So I think in Europe, and also the European Commission has announced that they are going to be regulating face recognition technologies EU-wide. That's to come this year, hopefully, but Europe is making advances.
Okay, I understand. Thank you. Maxime, welcome.
Hi, Joseph. How are you? Nice to see you.
Very well. Thank you.
I feel like we've been having this conversation for 20 years, but it's finally now risen to the top of everyone's minds. And I think it's fabulous because I think it's really important. And I just wanted to make a few comments and maybe the panelists can respond. One, I think the idea of banning technologies like banning books, you just can't do it, right? The cat is out of the bag. Facial recognition is here. And I think the knee-jerk reaction, particularly in some areas of the United States, to say, oh, we're going to ban this technology is kind of silly and ineffective. And I think the notion of self-regulation, which is something that I've advocated for 20 years, is just not happening. I mean, I think that the industry has had lots of time to build in safeguards, as one of the earlier guests mentioned, into the technology itself, something that, again, I've advocated for a long time, and it's not happening. So I think what we need are really public-private partnerships to create standards. It'd be both on a global level for interoperability, and then within individual sovereign areas that speaks to the particular concerns that any of those areas have.
Okay. Any reaction from the panel to what Maxime said? Thank you, Maxime.
Just from a US perspective, what I would say about bans is that if you look at other regulatory models, such as drug safety regulations or medical device regulations, there is a very robust procedure for proposing a ban and then creating a ban. Those procedures have not largely been followed in the United States. So some of the bans are really kind of very political, is what I would say. But that doesn't mean that there should never be a ban. I do think that there are certain use cases in face recognition systems that need to be considered for bans, particularly when the cameras are very low quality, such as, for example, face recognition on body cams used live. And I think we have to be very careful to not throw the baby out with the bathwater on either side.
Okay, thank you. Maxime, thank you very much. I want to elevate
Thanks,
Paul.
Joseph.
Thank you. Paul, operator, could you elevate Paul from the community voices? And then we'll come back to the panel with the closing remarks. Do we have Paul? Paul, please.
Hello,
yes.
can you all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Paul. Please introduce yourself.
Right.
Welcome to ID for Africa.
Okay, my name is Paul Damali, originally based in Ghana, co-founder and CEO of Approve. Approve basically is eKYC infrastructure across African countries. We train algorithms specifically to analyze, ID documents of Africans, and we are across about 6 African countries currently.
Excellent. And so this is an African company that is specialized and focused in KYC. Do you access face data? Do you use face as an element in the KYC process?
Yes, we do access these databases. Typically, what has to happen first is us understanding the regulatory regime in each country. So for example, there are about 16 data protection laws all across Africa. And as it stands now, we are in about 6 of these countries. And that's Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa, Egypt. You need to sort of like really be locally informed and understand the local context and what the data protection and other adjoining regulations say about how to access these kind of biometric data, what to use them for, but most importantly, also thinking about how you enable consent-based systems.
Yes.
One thing I want to point out, we've been using terminologies in the industry not properly. So what we do at Approve, we call it facial comparison because it is enabled by consent by the customer.
Individual.
Recognition, however, means that, and which is typically what the security agents do, because they already have access to the database and they don't enable the customer consent. If a security camera sort of like picks your face, they don't need your permission to use you. So there's a difference between those two, and we need to be able to recognize it. And so when it comes to application in industry like financial services, health, more of what is done is the consent or face comparison, which is consent-based.
Yes, so what Paul is saying, that in thinking about how to protect against the misuse of face, we should distinguish between face authentication and face recognition. Those two animals might require different types of legislation or different types of handling. Thank you, Paul, for being with us. Thanks for joining the ID for Africa family. I'm going to ask panelists to close on the thought. Pam, to you, and then Teki. Where do we go from here? I mean, obviously, we've just only begun. We've only opened the subject. I mean, we could go on to the whole evening discussing the subject. What should be the next steps for the international community? And then, Teki, what should be the next steps for the African community?
The next steps for the international community is to have a non-adversarial discussion between all the stakeholders that are in this debate, and to determine all of the regulatory tools that we need to be addressing this. We have to use more regulatory tools. We're not using all of them. We're not using certifications. We're not using codes of conduct, etc. So we've got to add those in. We've got to learn how to talk to each other. We've got to learn that we're going to have to work together to set appropriate limits in context. And this is a joint operation. It can't be done unilaterally by any stakeholder.
Okay, thanks, Pam. So dialogue, not an adversarial. There's no for or against. We gotta get together and we gotta develop the new types of tools that actually allow us to assess, if I understand.
Yes. These tools are well understood, so we don't need to reinvent the wheel, but we do need to get on the road. We do need to take steps forward. We cannot just let the situation stay as it is, because
right.
It is not productive.
Okay, so Teki, please guide us through this.
Yes, for Africa, I think that we have to be more transparent, especially at the governmental level, around how we are adopting and using these technologies. And I believe that for industry and vendors, they also need to come around the table and build this transparency into this whole area. And I would echo what Pam also said about bringing all the stakeholders to a dialogue. Clearly, because of some of the key issues involved, I would call on all the regulatory agencies regulating IT and technologies generally, regulators looking at data protection, and other human rights regulators and CSOs to sit around the table to really come out with some level of guidance on what is appropriate, what should be acceptable, and what should not.
Teki, is Africa Digital Rights Hub doing any of that right now?
We are currently conducting a number of research around facial technologies and how they are being deployed. Based on what we find out, we will probably propose, like we did with the ID, some code of conduct on what should go in and what should be taken out, like we did with the ID systems for Africa.
Okay. Well, as I said, this is not the end, this is the beginning. I think we will be bringing in the subject again throughout the year to see how we're progressing in our thinking. We need actionable steps. We're identifying problems, but we're not identifying the steps to how we should solve them. I think we've exceeded our time. I knew this would be a very intense session. It's okay. We still have a lot of people with us, but I need to respect strictly the time now and end the session by thanking Pam and Teki, and also all of the community voices and all of the other panelists. Special thanks go to Patrick for a wonderful presentation, and to the 4 case studies that helped improve our awareness of where face recognition is being used. So we'll bring back the panel, whoever is still there, and just to wave goodbye and to say, we'll see you again on the 16th. Please remember the 16th, say that's International Identity Day. That's the day we're going to focus on the subject of inclusion by celebrating the recognition of September 16th as International Identity Day. There's a whole program of activities, so please stick around, come back on the 16th, and let us hear from you within the community voices. So thank you all for enriching our knowledge this afternoon, and I just wish you all safe and productive continuation of your day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you all.